This evening here on Smart Markets to actually get an expert's take on things who will perhaps, give us a bit of a heads up on the big risks that lie ahead for the global economy. Joining in today on the show is Toby Latta. He's the Chief Executive Officer of Asia Pacific at Control Risks, and he joins in right here live in our studios. Toby, good evening. Thank you so much for taking time out for us.
Hi, good evening.
You're coming to us at a time when everyone in the country is in a bit of a bind about this mega cash cleanup that we've seen the government initiate. What are the risks you think it poses? Do you see it dimming India's shining star status? Because most global agencies for sure believe that the next 2 quarters is going to be a little painful.
Great question. Great to be talking about this on the show when the whole country is talking about this new word we've all learnt globally called demonetization. Great to be talking about something other than the Trump presidency and Middle Eastern conflict. But look, it's an extraordinary and highly audacious measure that the government is undertaking at a very important time, I think, and one overall that should be welcomed. It's really as we see it, setting out to address some key issues that have been facing India and the Indian economy. And these are all issues that we as an organisation at Control Risks spend a lot of our time thinking about in terms of important risks. So one of those is the issue of corruption. And of course, removing a large amount of black money from the economy doesn't solve the issue of corruption, but it certainly addresses one of the key issues that fuels corruption in the economy. So that is potentially very welcome. There's the issue of tax evasion and there's the issue of the informal economy. And clearly, with a measure of this nature, which is so high profile and high risk, there are issues that go along with that. And we are certainly watching those risks from the outside as an advisor. A lot of companies are operating and investing in India. Of course, slowing growth potentially, reduction in consumer spending. So it could be a difficult quarter or two in the year ahead. But certainly, we believe it's an extremely admirable and audacious measure, which we're going to be following very closely over the next 6 months or so.
Toby, talking of economy, some latest data seems to be suggesting coming out of US that it's the second time they've upgraded their GDP estimates, 3.2% now. And even ever since Mr. Trump's name has emerged as a president-elect, people have started talking about GDP growth rate going higher from here on due to the steps he's outlined. Some of the agencies have upped the GDP growth estimate going forward. Do you really think what are your thoughts on the actual state of US economy and its trajectory in the medium term?
Well, it's a really good question, and a bit like after the Brexit vote, things were happening in the British stock market, for example, a little bit contrary to what was expected. I think there's a certain amount of reaction going on in the US at the moment to expected increases in investment and infrastructure, one of the central planks of the presidential campaign by Trump. But a lot of it really is up in the air. It's extraordinary to have gone through this very, very difficult campaign with a lot of reasonably far out extreme statements being made by the candidate who is now president-elect, and really in many respects we don't really know what he's going to do, so we're going to be watching that very closely. But I think the general direction of travel that we do know about is going to be kind of on the horizon pretty soon, and that obviously is a lot more in terms of economic nationalism more generally, populism in relation to domestic affairs, a bit more isolationism in relation to international affairs, and certainly, as we've been observing, kind of a drawback from the trend in globalization and cutting back against some of the major free trade agreements that have been very much a feature of the last several decades. And that impact that will have on the global economy and consequently on the US economy is really difficult to forecast. But I think just to bring that to a bit closer to home here in Asia Pacific and in India specifically, obviously the fact that some of those big trade agreements were aimed at tying the US closer into in Asia, and now Trump withdrawing from those could well result in kind of a pivot away from Asia again, less influence exerted by the US in Asia, with perhaps conversely growing Chinese influence coming in its stead. For India, though, perhaps a different matter altogether. In many ways, India hasn't been the beneficiary of some of the big waves of globalization, of some of the big multilateral trade agreements that have been a feature of recent times. And Trump is going to push much more towards bilateral trade agreements, bilateral relationships where economic self-interest comes to the fore, and that could benefit India potentially as well. Some of the signs coming out of the Trump camp seem to be quite positive in relation to India, although the subject of kind of make in India versus make in America, which is one of Trump's planks, also remains to be seen how that plays out.
Right. Toby, let's also talk about the other big global cue, and that's something that not many people are talking about, and that's the Italian referendum, especially after, the democratic shock that we got both in the UK and the US, because if pollsters had anything to go by, we wouldn't be staring at reality as it is.
Yeah.
A defeat for Prime Minister Matteo Renzi could potentially lead to early elections, a rise in support for, the populist Five-Star Movement, and that's a party that's pledged to carry out a referendum on whether or not Italy should stay in the euro area, a lot like what we saw the UK do. How much of a risk does that situation pose to the global economy, you think?
So, I mean, the conclusion first, and then get to some detail. We kind of don't think it's going to come to that in truth. But having said that, political risk in Europe in the wake of Brexit and the various movements towards greater isolationism, economic nationalism in Europe as well, mean that political risk is really back with a vengeance in Europe. And, we never thought in the political risk business that we're in that that's what would happen there. So kind of everything is up in the air in Europe as well. We don't think that the referendum result, which is quite likely actually to be a no vote, so going against Matteo Renzi and what he is trying to achieve in terms of limiting the power of the upper house, the Senate in Italy, it's unlikely that he will win that. It could well result in his resignation. We could see subsequently elections taking place, although it's not a foregone conclusion that they would happen right away. And it is possible that the populist movement, the Five-Star movement, would come to the fore. But for them to win control of both houses of parliament, not least the upper house, the Senate, which the whole referendum question was trying to address, means that they are in many ways going to have their hands tied. It's not going to be that easy for them to push for a referendum vote. And frankly, at the current time, a lot of the public opinion polls show that the Italian population is really not in favour of an exit from the European Union. But as I said, political risk in Europe these days means that everything's kind of up in the air, and we kind of say never at the moment. And a lot of other things are happening around the rest of Europe, which are putting the European Union under significant pressure still.
Toby, let's shift focus and talk about emerging market as a basket, particularly Asian emerging markets, which we are also part of. Just today, Mark Mobius of Franklin Templeton has released a note saying BRICS could actually shine much more systemic manner, and the emerging market currencies, which came under weather last 2 weeks, in fact, after the dollar index rose, may be temporary because the growth is much more domestic in nature. What are your thoughts on Asian emerging markets, including China, in fact, because a lot of people have started getting overweight once again after the big price damage is done?
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously a subject that a lot of our friends and clients operating in Asia Pacific are very concerned about and watching very closely. There are kind of several strands of opinion around this, if I can put it that way. Firstly, that kind of there may be a tendency for capital move back towards some of the developed markets as perhaps interest rates rise. Trump spending large amounts of money on infrastructure in the US. Perhaps similar trends in Europe as some of those populist anti-globalist trends come to the fore. So investment kind of being pulled back into some of the developed markets. It's certainly a potential for that. But on the other hand, there's enormous amount of interest still and opportunity in emerging markets. And that is absolutely true of India. And it continues to be the case for China as well. So we last year in our risk map, which we put out every year, we said we really need to watch China carefully. but we also said it's not time to give up on China. There's been a lot of doomsayers who think that growth rates are really going to decline very significantly. We are not of the view that China is on the brink. So we think absolutely that there are dangers to be watched in the Chinese economy. There are issues around some of the old engines for growth in the Chinese economy really slowing down, not being replaced by some of the new engines that the government is trying to stimulate. So we're kind of a little bit in limbo. There are some issues around levels of debt in China, but we absolutely don't think that the 2017 is going to be seeing China go into crisis in any way. The Beijing government absolutely has all the policy tools kind of at its fingertips and is able and has the will to exercise those, although we clearly need to see some restructuring in the economy happening rather faster than it has been of late.
All right, Toby, we leave it at that. Thank you so much for taking time out for us. And of
Thank
course,
you very
we
much.
will have you back next year to walk us through what the risk map for 2017 is looking like. Thank you so
forward to
much.
it.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/ETNow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at ETNowLive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/user/ETNow.